All right, so thanks everybody for joining. Let me make sure I get my settings here correct. Today we're trying something a little bit new. I've got Rob Lauer here on the line as well. Hi, Rob.
Hello, everybody.
Hope.
And just so you know, you're not seeing my nasty basement ceiling here. I have a green screen behind me, and I'm projecting a nasty basement ceiling behind me.
Rob's very hipster. You know, he's in his swanky house there, but he wants to make it seem like he's really roughing it, working from his basement.
Exactly.
Rob's cat might also be joining us on this stream today as well. My dog is down here as well, so she's got a bed over here, but she likes this spot randomly over here a little bit better. So
if it's like any other meeting we're in, my cat will announce his presence any minute now.
All right. So what we wanted to do today is talk about one of our favorite topics for NativeScript. And I've got the documentation page over here. And we'll talk about accessing native APIs for iOS and Android through JavaScript. And so what we're going to do is, we talk about this a lot, but we'll explain what this is. And then we're just going to go in and just start fooling around, playing with some native APIs. So if you're watching this, if you have questions, feel free to ask. If you have suggestions, things you'd like to see us sort of experiment with, let us know. But basically, I guess I give the 30-second explanation to what this is, and then we'll just actually dive in. It's that in NativeScript, one of the reasons we call NativeScript native is you can just sort of straight up call iOS and Android APIs directly in JavaScript or TypeScript code. So if you're building a NativeScript Android app, you can type java.lang.math.min, and that just works on Android. Or you could do things like, say, new UIButton over on iOS. And so this is what makes a lot of what we do in NativeScript possible. For example, the entire NativeScript plugin system is built on this. This is the same approach, really. NativeScript itself the core modules are written with this approach as well. So it's pretty powerful, and you can do a whole lot. And so that's what we want to sort of experiment with.
Yeah, and I'd say as time goes on, with device hardware improving, the idea of significant performance differences between frameworks has become not negligible, but I think the competitive advantage there is kind of disappearing. And so when a lot of people compare NativeScript to like a React Native, for instance, a lot of folks, we actually end up winning based on this one key feature, the fact that you can access these native APIs so easily, as hopefully we will see today.
Yeah, if all goes well. Yeah, because in React Native, for example, they have their bridge, which is basically there's a JavaScript API, and you use that to basically act as sort of like a middleman between your JavaScript code and then code you'd write in just the native languages, so Objective-C, Swift, Java, Kotlin, and operate through that, which works, but it's less convenient than being able to just sort of straight up type it and keep all your code in the same place, less context switching and all that good stuff. So pretty powerful. So how should we tackle this? We have Ed on the line. Hello, Ed.
Hey, Ed.
If anybody... Go ahead, Rob.
So just so everybody knows, I get to play the idiot today, which is very easy for me to do because TJ is the real expert. He just makes me look good. But for me, I've always been curious about this feature because, in all honesty, I kind of play safe with the built-in modules, maybe some trusted plugins that we have. And I've actually never really dived into this too deeply. So I don't know. Do you want to start with something simple?
Sure. So why don't we, we're starting from a completely sort of blank slate. Let's just start creating a native API Zap. And I don't know, Rob, do you want core? Do you want Angular? What's your preference?
Let's keep it simple. It's plain TypeScript.
Plain TypeScript. All right.
It's my jam.
I will say you almost certainly want to use TypeScript when you're working with native APIs, as you'll see here in a minute. You don't have to use any of those options with NativeScript. You can always use native APIs. They're there at the JavaScript level. But TypeScript, when you use TypeScript with native APIs, it gives you the sort of code completion, all the things. It kind of makes it more like working in something like Xcode or Android Studio. You get more like IDE-like behavior, which when you're working with these native APIs is quite nice.
Yeah, I think we're going to see, I'm going to guess that we're going to see today that TypeScript is going to be incredibly critical here. And I think, even the use case for plain vanilla JavaScript with NativeScript is decreasing dramatically. I think, most folks are pretty much on the TypeScript bandwagon.
Yeah, TypeScript for life. So I'm going to clear out who wrote these comments.
But just to clarify, TJ used to be a TypeScript hater, so
I did.
Let's make sure we're all aware of that.
And it's documented on the internet too. So, all right. So I was just clearing things up, and what I'm going to do is just run this thing. And I got my iPhone, so I'm going to bring this up, and we'll just set up a sort of just a blank slate workspace that we can work from. And I got QuickTime. I'm going to bring over my phone.
Ed admits to being a TypeScript hater at one time.
Yeah, exactly. You know how real you are by when you got on the bandwagon. So
right.
For me, it was like a year or two ago. So I eventually came over to the dark side. So I've got some random apps here. So while this is building, so this is our basic example, and let's see. So let's see, if I just said alert type of UIButton, and so notice when I do this right away, it doesn't know what UIButton is because this is TypeScript, and there's a way of fixing that the right way, but for now, I think it's, is it like declare? There's some way to make it okay in TypeScript. It's like declare bar UI button any. There's your TypeScript hack of the day. If you're upset at TypeScript and because you know better than it does, you can cheat.
If you see the any joke on Twitter, that's the classic TypeScript joke.
You can always get around it. So it's installing my app. We'll give it another second or two so we can actually see what's happening here. And then I'll save this, and we should only have to go through this once. Then we'll start to have some fun. I guess while this is up, I will drag. Oh, there it goes. This is my favorite part of any NativeScript demo. All right, so we have this, and then should have HMR, so I'll just save this change, and I will do an alert. And so UIButton is a function. So obviously, if you were doing this code in something like the browser would have no idea what UIButton is. In NativeScript, we inject all these APIs, so UIButton is a thing. You can do things with it. So that's sort of this is Hello World, essentially. And so the next problem is, well, all right, we have this, but how would you even know what APIs these are? How do you fix the TypeScript errors? So step 2 is you need something called TMS Platform Declarations. Have you played with this at all, Rob?
No, this was going to be my first question, how this is set up.
So basically, there's GitHub repos in the NativeScript org that essentially generate these things, and it's some of like the most interesting and gnarly code in NativeScript. And I'm not going to pretend I understand really any of it because it gets pretty deep, but it generates these massive d.ts files, which I think are like the TypeScript declaration or definition files, whatever they're called. And so if you want to use these things somewhere in here, it should explain. But if I go over here, you actually need to install them because they do not. Yeah,
these are. Sorry, I was going to just say that these are updated by the NativeScript core team constantly. I mean, you'll always see that the file itself was updated within the last couple days. There's always API tweaks to document and such.
And the reason, actually, I'm not 100% sure why these don't come installed with every new app that you build. It might have to do with the size because...
Yeah, I was just going to say, I bet it's the size because I think they're massive.
Yeah, we can actually go look at these. So TMS Platform Declarations. So you see like Android, iOS. If we just go into one of these things, I mean, so it brings in all these, and you can get a sense of... Yeah, I'm going to crash VS Code here because there's just... Try not to give people a vertigo here. There's just a ton of stuff in here. And actually because of that, so let me back out one step. And so I have these. I can get this back running again. So that's ready to go. But once I do this, I also have to, if we bring over my docs here, create a reference.d.ts file, which NativeScript is set up to look for by default. So reference.d.ts, and copy in these 2 lines of code. NPM really needs like a widget to clipboard this. Yeah. So you put this in here. And then once you do that, there's one other thing on here too. I know. Actually, the docs for this should be a little bit better. But so one reason that I know this isn't included by default is that because these files are so large, like VS Code can get lagged down because it has to parse these massive files. And also it can make your compile times take forever because the TypeScript compiler is going to have to take these things into account. And so you can take this skiplivecheck and put it in your TS config. Oh, it's actually already here. Okay, so I didn't realize that, but in this template, skiplivecheck is actually already set.
So what does that actually do? It skips something, but
it's basically saying like, don't. I'm not 100% positive, but basically, I think it says when you compile this file, for example, this TS file, don't like check that everything is totally correct. So it's potentially problematic, but the theory is that your editor would catch that sort of thing, I believe. I don't know. Maybe we have a TypeScript expert on the call that can help us out with exactly what that check does. But I do know that if you don't set that, your compile times are pretty epic because they're bringing in these like meg big TypeScript declaration files. But okay, so if this worked though, I should now be able to do this, and it's still, because these files are so big, like you can see that took like a full second probably to figure things out. But you get the code completion. Like I said, this is almost like you're working in Xcode now because you have all these things available, and you can see, I can't even remember.
So you could get rid of that declare line up above now, right?
Oh, yeah, and actually that might be screwing things up. So I could do like UI alert. I can't remember, but like the iOS is notoriously like verbose too. Like, there you go. And like I said, you could do this in JavaScript code, but like, your odds of typoing or screwing something like this up or knowing that this exists.
Look at that name.
Yeah, exactly.
That's insane.
It's descriptive. It's the apparent for trait collection when contained in instances of classes. Whatever that is. So yeah, there you go. So that's the setup. And it's, if you look actually at the like source code for NativeScript itself, you'll see that this is really the approach it takes. So TNS core modules, if we just, I don't know, bring up a random like iOS file. So this is transpiled TypeScript to JavaScript, but it's going to take, that's actually a bad example. Let's do like colors. So yeah, like UIcolor.alloc.init, for example. So this is really the way that NativeScript itself is built up. All right. So
yeah, since NativeScript's all open source, you can get on GitHub and see this for yourself and see how the pull the curtain back and see how it all runs.
Yeah, you could start contributing to NativeScript too. Know how it works. So what should we do, Rob? I know so when Rob and I planned this out, we have one example that we were going to try to make the flashlight work, and that was our one sort of canned example. And then from there, we could take requests. We can try to build a little plugin. We can have a little fun. So
yeah, so I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a developer, and I think that there's a lot of folks know already that NativeScript is very focused on writing, having one code base, and you're building for iOS and Android from that code base. But there's always going to be times when you need specific functionality, hit specific APIs, or expose a certain UI for individual platforms. And so I'm wondering if, not that off the top of my head I could think of a unique API, but if we could pretend that maybe on an ad hoc basis, say, I don't want to go through the process of making a plugin, but maybe I just want to access some iOS API in code here, keeping it kind of simple. So, and maybe that's Flashlight?
Yeah.
Just for a simple example?
Yeah, I think, like, at least for me, I think the first thing I usually do is look if there is a plugin that exists for NativeScript, but if it doesn't, that's where you sort of have to dive in. And so why don't we do Flashlight? Just because there is a Flashlight plugin, but it's kind of a really, it's just a simple example of seeing how this can work realistically. So let's see, we've got a button on tap. So we'll just leverage this tap to do something different. So let's head in here and we can kill all this. We don't really need any of this. Just clean the slate.
So while TJ is doing this, I'd say it's super valid to always look for a plugin before you're going to get into this, because this is obviously getting into the weeds pretty quickly here. But there's going to be a lot of cases where a plugin will get you 80 or 90% of the way, and you still need to access some API that's not exposed by a plugin. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking of, like, our augmented reality plugin is incredibly amazing, but does it expose literally every API that's, oh, hey, there's my cat. Does it expose literally every API provided by ARKit and ARCore? No, it doesn't. So there may be times when you need to get into the weeds a little bit to get the exact API you're looking for.
And so, like everybody else, usually when I run into this situation, the first thing I do is just literally Google something like this, because I don't know how to turn the flashlight on, and the iOS docs aren't particularly searchable or easy to find things. And so I normally end up on something like this that'll provide, like, some random code. And so in this case, this is going to be some Objective-C code. And I'll make this bigger so we can get a sense of what this looks like. And yeah, the weirdest thing, like,
stop it.
This is like, and I'm definitely no expert on this, but this is where the hardest part of doing this comes in. We're doing iOS, and iOS is actually far harder because Java code is actually somewhat similar to TypeScript, so converting it over really isn't that bad. But this isn't as bad as it sort of initially appears. The only thing that's really important to know that's absolutely bizarre is that this is a method call, essentially, or so like this is, for example, you're taking the device object, or I believe that's what it's called in Objective-C, calling a setTorchMode method and passing it this as an argument, essentially, or a parameter. So if we take this and try to convert it over...
That is weird syntax, but all right.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that, like, and that's why, like, with NativeScript, you can, something like this is something you can convert over, and it'll take you a little bit of time while you're not used to it. But if you really want to get serious about implementing a bunch of this functionality, you really do kind of have to have some iOS or Android experience, just because you have to know a little bit about how, like, I can't even remember what this is called, but like sort of pointers in Objective-C and figuring out how all of that works. But for our purposes, we're going to keep things kind of simple. And so there's some things in here, like there's a lot of checks to see like if the flashlight's available. But all we're going to do is just try to turn the thing on. And so
Can I stump you with a question first?
Yeah.
What if I'm provided Swift code and not Objective-C to try and copy those method calls and stuff?
It's actually similar, and actually it's probably easier to convert over. So actually we could just try building it off of this, because actually this looks a lot more like JavaScript code. And on iOS, and I'm probably going to say something wrong, so if there's any nitpicky people in the chat, you can correct me, but essentially all of the Swift APIs, or the iOS APIs, are exposed to Swift and Objective-C, so just the syntax to access them is a little bit different. So actually, we could probably build this off the Swift code a little bit easier. So the key part here is this AV capture device. And so I'm in here, I've got the TypeScript set up, and so we should see capture device dot default device with media type and AV. Let's see what this is. Media type video. All right, and then we save that off as device. And then we could have a if check. I think we'll just skip that because we just want to turn this thing on. So I could add the check. But for now, I want to lock for configuration. And I don't think I need to pass this in at all, because I think if I don't pass anything in, it'll be just undefined, which is, I think, what we want. We could go to like the iOS docs and look what this thing actually does. But I think we're fine. And TypeScript's... Yeah.
What's lock for configuration?
I think... So let's see. This could be interesting. Let's just go see.
This is why I'm here, to ask the real questions.
I think what it does is like to prevent multiple things, like you essentially lock it so that if there's two things running in code that try to interact with the hardware at the same time, it doesn't allow them to sort of step on each other's toes. Because what you do is you lock it and then you unlock it right as soon as you make the change. But let's see if lock for configuration. Before you attempt to set properties of a capture device, you must first acquire a lock on the device. You may hold the lock if you want settable device properties to remain unchanged. However, holding the device lock may degrade capture quality in other applications sharing the device and is not recommended. So that's what you got to go on.
Makes sense.
From iOS. But actually, like, iOS docs are, I usually just find them by just Googling the class names. They're generally pretty decent. So we'll lock, and then let's start by just turning this thing on. So device.torch mode equals AV capture torch mode dot. Let's see. So we want to turn it on, and torch mode on. We could have some fun too. I think the later versions of iOS let you set the level of the flashlight.
Right.
But let's just see if this actually turns the thing on. So we get the device, we lock it, we turn the torch mode on, and then we unlock it. And let's see. So I have my flashlight here. Yeah, so there we go. Let's see if I blind the chat here. Oh, I didn't build an off onto here. So if we wanted to do an off, we'd say, so we lock it, and then we say, probably, so if we're on, we want to make it off. Did I do that right, Rob? So if it's on, turn it off. else. I don't know. We'll see if it works.
I think so.
So let's see. I think I screwed it up, or I just can't get it off at this point. Could resort to a good old console log to see if I got it. All right, so we'll refresh. What's happening, Rob? Oh, there we go. Successfully synced.
Might want to pull that window up a little bit. It's being blocked by the
by the window.
By my basement. Yeah.
Basement's taking it out. We'll restart it. I might have. My guess is that I might be getting some error because I left the thing on. Actually, I should. But this is funny too. I can't actually turn it off, like on my actual phone. So if I go in here and I go, I have no control. Like it's just I've just permanently screwed up the phone. But we'll see if I can fix it. But this is where like it's a little bit of trial and error if you're really not coming from an iOS background. Like I'm most definitely not. And so we do 0.
This is kind of a good example too of how this can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, because NativeScript does allow you to access undocumented APIs as well, and you can get into some, I don't know, some crazy situations, I suppose, if you're not somewhat careful.
I wonder if, like, there's some weird things too. So I'm just going to get away from the ternary. So we'll log this again. I'm not going to dwell on this too much if it doesn't work, but we'll try one more thing. Some of this too might be, so let's see if it's on stat torch mode. Oh, I did equals. That was the problem.
Should have caught that.
Yeah, see,
I failed you.
but he's letting me down. All right, so or maybe I didn't. I don't know. This is where let's go back to the long way so the ternary doesn't in here. So if it's on, let's just be really explicit. Wouldn't
be Twitch without a demo fail. So,
well, anything. It's like anything else. So it's on, we'll turn it off. If it's off, we'll turn it on. I wonder too if the reason I had to refresh earlier is because like I got into some sort of errored state. Okay, so there we go. On, off. Okay. So I don't know. We'll have to watch this later to see if it might have just been my typo or I got it in some sort of bizarre state, but there's your...
Yeah, you locked it without unlocking it or something?
Yeah, exactly. So there you go. So there's Flashlight in iOS. And if you wanted to bring this to... I don't think I'm going to code this out for Android. Maybe the next example we could do on Android as well. But you could either do this, put this in like a .ios.ts file and then the Android in a .android.ts file. And so you could separate your implementations. Or you could just say, let's see, from... And you just put it all.
Ooh, I'm impressed you have this from memory here.
Oh, come on, TypeScript. The one down, that's like when you have the platform declarations in, like everything you do with TypeScript in your editor is just that tiny bit slower because it has to parse through all that. But it's worth it if you're working with these APIs, because otherwise, good luck coding these things. It's just going to be a disaster. All right. See, the cat's impressed.
I warned you all this would happen.
All right. So where do we go from here, Rob? We got this. So this is like I need something quick and dirty.
Right.
You could even go into this A/B capture device, and there's a lot more you can do with this sort of thing. Like you could all sorts of things you could play with and experiment with.
I need something to throw at the cat. No, this is exactly what I wanted to see. I think in those situations where I wanted to access just some kind of API really quickly, and I would literally never want to reuse it in my code, for instance, then this is what I would do. But maybe we could look at another example, or maybe we want to take that next step and put it in some kind of reusable package.
Yeah, do we want to pick some other random API, or do we want to just try to build a plugin? Because the plugin is a little more, shouldn't say complex, it's a little simpler, but because the idea here is you have this, but it's specific to this app, obviously. But NativeScript has ways that you can export this to plugins that you can use anywhere. So there's some conventions along that. So we could either do that or maybe try one more example, maybe with Android.
Sure.
All right, what do we want to do on Android? Because I don't have an Android device, but I've got an emulator.
We had talked about doing the sharing.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, let's
sharing option.
Let's do that. All right, so let's get the Android compilation going so it doesn't have to work. So I'll just go to my faithful Android. Do you know the name of it on Android? Does anybody know? It's like the share widget API. It's not going to be the web share API. How to activate the share button in an Android app. I think this is it. Sharing intent. Add a button, and then click the button, add this code. All right, so I think this is what we need. I think. We'll find out.
Looks right.
I think this is always easier, though, because we could almost about copy and paste this.
Right.
And it'll pretty much work. And actually, let's see what happens. So we'll just forget this. Let's get iOS out of the way. iOS is old news. And on tap, let's just see what happens. So don't have to cite classes in JavaScript. This intent needs to be fully spelled out. So when in Java, you'd have something like import android.content.intent, something like that at the top of your code. I think C# works like that too, where you do an import up here, and then it just knows by intent it means this. But in NativeScript, you have to spell this out. You could also set variables to clean up the code. But android.content.intent, sharing intent, set type. We don't need to say this is a string of our share body. And then we don't know what start activity is. Intent needs...
So we got a good question about use case of scanning QR codes. I don't believe the NativeScript camera plugin supports those out of the box. I do know there is I haven't looked into this in a long time, but I believe there is some kind of QR code scanning plugin that kind of replaces the camera or appends to that functionality.
Yeah, if you can find a bit of Android code, we could totally take a shot at that. Maybe scan a playground example or something like that. Oh, I forgot. I've been doing some Android Wear testing. So the NativeScript CLI. So there's a Android Wear plugin for NativeScript, and so it totally just took this app and deployed it to Wear OS.
Yeah, if you're doing any Android Wear stuff, actually, that plugin is pretty awesome. You don't have to do much of anything to get your app working on a Wear device, Wear OS device.
I'm actually kind of amazed at how that works because it basically just takes Android apps and lets them run. I'm just basically right now Android Studios being nice and slow as it usually is. I just need to get the right emulator up. It's not my Wear OS. Let's get up the Pixel emulator, and then we'll try this out. I do need to figure out, there's this bit about start activity, and I don't know where that's coming from, so we'll need to figure that out anyway. So while this emulator is starting up, let me get my browser back over. And so this code, this is the biggest thing I run into with Android code is like people don't share the imports because they're just sort of assumed to know it. We'll see if somebody included the import in here. And then if that fails, we'll just go to the Google and see if we can find it. Start another activity. Oh, that had a link.
It's like professional Google searching for developers.
Yeah, this is all the stream is. So where is this? So android.app.activity.start activity. So app.activity. No? Is it lowercase? So we'll have to find this. I can cheat for a second because I know there is this plugin, and I don't know what it does, but so normally I'd have to track down where that start activity comes from, but this is coming from context.start activity.
I'm trying to do my own searching here. I see that.
So it's this. So eventually we would have Googled and figured that out. And then the application is the NativeScript application. The other thing too, I'll say is that when you're first trying to do this, like looking at existing plugins is a good way of figuring out what you're supposed to be doing. Like I think, for example, the QR code stuff, you could almost even like fork the camera plugin as a starting point because it's probably going to have a lot of similar type of code that's going to implement that sort of stuff, or at least give you an idea of where to start from so that you're not totally coming in from scratch.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I was going to recommend too, like any of the plugins written by Eddie Verbruggen tend to be very well documented for one thing, and also the code's pretty easy to read as well, so it's a good examort to start with.
And this is it's funny, this has my name on it, so I can get the credit, but you'll see like Eddie's sort of taken this over and made this useful. And so this is a NativeScript plugin for sharing. What we're trying to do is just do like the world's simplest example of this, just so we can see everything working. So let's bump this up. It's starting up, and let's see if we just get it first shot. Nope. So that failed. Okay. From outside an activity context requires the flag activity new task. Is this really what you want? All right. This is, again, where like having some Android experience comes into play, because this totally gets at to the how you actually start this. So let's see, create a new intent, put this on, start an activity. I will probably just cheat from this. So
Eddie's on here, so I know he's just chopping at the bit to tell us what we're doing wrong here.
Eddie, what are we doing wrong? Let's explain Android activities to us, because otherwise I'm just gonna steal this code. Because I know like Android is like has this process or this concept of different activities that you can start. I think this is what we need, but I don't know if I would have found that through a Google search. But I might have if I just Googled this. And something would have told me to actually create it this way. So I've got, Rob's face is going to cut us off again here. So I've got the sharing intent, but I didn't actually set this flag. So I'm going to totally just copy and paste this and see if it actually just fixes the problem right now. And maybe somebody in the chat can explain to me why it does. But let's see if it just straight up fixes this. So we'll start a new activity, start this, and it still doesn't work. So we're getting the same thing, calling start activity from outside an activity. Context requires the flag activity new task flag, which is what I think we have, flag activity new task.
I can't get over that snarky, is this really what you want?
Yeah. Android is sort of laughing at us here. All right, so I don't know. So in here, I'm going to end up just copying straight from the existing plugin code. Like I said, sometimes you just kind of have to do that, because the API they use here is a little bit different. So Android.content .intent. So we can break this out.
While you're doing that, I'll answer the question here. Often does NativeScript provide updates to deal with security vulnerabilities, and how do we go about selecting a plugin? Security vulnerabilities, it's not generally something that is handled by the NativeScript team. If you think about the way NativeScript is architected, it's really kind of passing through to the underlying device API. So it's when security issues come up with iOS and Android, those are patched on the OS side. NativeScript just like allows you to do anything that you normally would want to do with iOS and Android. Now, if there's security issues with any of the core framework or any plugins that we manage, those are always taken care of, although off the top of my head I can't even think of one ever. In terms of how do we go about selecting a plugin from the marketplace, that's a good question, because there are oftentimes 2 or 3 plugins that look like they do the same thing. For me, I always look at when was most recently updated, how many stars does it have, how much interest does there seem to be with any issues and such. So it's really kind of it's a bit of a subjective measure, I guess, on the quality of a plugin. But usually I'd say it's pretty obvious which plug to use, or so I like to think.
Agreed. Now I'm wondering, like, are my changes going across or not? They certainly look like they are. I could have been doing this whole thing and it's not actually compiling my changes. All right, so there's my alert. So let's bring this back in. Try it out one more time. Because I'm not sure. I believe I'm setting the flags that I need to send. Okay, no, this is the problem. I'm starting the activity and I'm not passing in the intent I built up there. And actually that's probably been the problem for the last few of these, because I was messing with this, but then I never bothered changing it where it appeared there. Let me give it a second. I don't know if it picked up on that change or not. This is good old professional debugging techniques right here. It still doesn't like this. All right. Well, I'm not going to dwell on this too much. This is basically the approach that you take, but you end up, this is sort of the challenge of diving into native land, is although NativeScript makes it easy to do this in the sense that I'm in VS Code, I can use these APIs, I don't have to context switch and such. There is still, you sort of can't escape the fact that you kind of have to know how to use these APIs. And so clearly I'm winging this a little bit here, but what I probably should do, which is probably going to take too long for this stream, is say, let me go and find the Android documentation on intents. And it thinks it's a URL. And actually read through these things and understand it, kind of like you do with anything else. So what intents are, how they work, how you're supposed to use them, use to launch activities and whatnot. Because even though you can access these APIs, you still actually do have to use them correctly. And so you could look through here and sort of figure things out. I don't think, unless Eddie's going to save us here, I think I'm probably just going to abandon this as is, unless you see anything obviously that I'm doing wrong, Rob.
I don't know. I mean, I think what I've learned so far is that NativeScript enables me as a developer to do this, but it's certainly not for the faint of heart, depending on the APIs you're trying to access. It's normally you want to rely on the plugin experts who've already done the work, but if you have to, it's available.
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing too is like you could probably, like if you work at a company that has people with some iOS or Android expertise, usually they can step in and sort of point out things that you're doing obviously wrong here in a few seconds. And if you are building an app that requires this a little bit more, you probably will have to learn a little bit more about how iOS and Android work, how these basic mechanisms apply and whatnot.
So Eddie just said the last line should have sharing intent passed, not intent.
See, I knew Eddie would save us. I knew that I said the problem was on this line, but I did it wrong. Okay. No activity found to handle intent.
Hey, different error messages are always better, right?
We did totally make progress here. Android intent action dot chooser. No activity found to handle the intent. All right, we'll give this like 1 full minute, and then we'll just give up and move on. Because I think, did I bring up? I lost my window with the social share source code. There are no apps able to handle what's to share. This is a simulator, Eddie, so yeah, it's possible that there is no sharing widget set up on this simulator, and that this code is not set up to handle this error situation. And it's kind of like what we did with the flashlight too. We just sort of, for the purposes of a quick demo, assumed there was a flashlight there, but if I would have tried to run that on the iOS simulator, that would not have ended well either. So I think you might be right. I think it might just be this emulator just cannot handle sharing actions. And I probably could go into the settings here and set that up, but I don't think we need to dive too much into that. All right.
Let's just assume that was the problem.
Yeah, exactly. I think it is, but I don't know.
So do you want to talk about, just in the little bit of time we have left here, about the plugin seed maybe?
Yeah, that's a good segue. So let's, I think the idea here is, so this code is here, but if you wanted to create a plugin, maybe you wanted to deploy it to multiple applications, you wanted to share it with a NativeScript world, let's kill this. And if we go to, let's just empty our screen out and go to the NativeScript documentation. And if we go in here, there's actually a complete section on the NativeScript documentation about all things plugins. So building, you can bring in things like native frameworks. So sometimes too, if you're writing something very complex and you don't want to code that all up in native code, lots of times someone's already created like an iOS library that does it for you, and you can just sort of wrap that up in NativeScript, and it makes your life a lot easier. But if you want to write things totally from scratch, you want to use the NativeScript plugin seed. And so let's just build the world's simplest plugin here real quick. And so, like I said, you can find this in the NativeScript documentation. And let's just do this. So we start by cloning a repo. So what plugin do you want to build, Rob? What should we call this?
Oh boy.
I need a name or chat. I'll just use the first thing somebody types in.
Careful with that.
Yeah, the first work-appropriate thing that someone types in. No one? Right. Could type NativeScript math. NativeScript whatever. Okay.
Yes.
We'll do NativeScript.
1 + 1.
Right, so this is going to be the world's most useful NativeScript plugin that there is. And so we cloned it, and then we'll go into the source folder. Let's see, source.
Too late, Ed.
Ed blew it. All right, so we'll do this. What is my Twitch name? My Twitch name is Rob Lauer. He's going to get credit for this. This is the math plugin. Do I want to include a TypeScript, NativeScript application? So it does things like set up, we're setting up TypeScript, we're setting up Angular, some demos that are going to make this plugin a lot easier to test. And then after that, we'll just run this app. So let me this out of the way. So it'll take a little bit of time to start up, because this is actually, if I bring this up in VS Code, I can talk a little bit about the structure and answer any questions that come in. So while this is creating the apps, basically you end up with this structure that has a source folder, which is where your actual plugin code lives. And then you have these demo projects that are just little simple NativeScript apps that are set up to bring in the plugin source code, so that it's just makes it easy to test. Basically, you get like a testing workflow and scaffolding out of the box. And our math plugin, by default, all it's going to do is it's got like this little message that it shows, and this little thing that just says your plugin is working. And that's basically all that goes on. This is going to take a while to set up, because it's scaffolding both these demo apps. It's running the npm installs. It's setting it up so it installs this plugin in. It's going to ask me if I want to use Git.
Ed's got a good question about, already answered. Yeah, about any good books on learning NativeScript.
It's the NativeScript book, which I think you could just Google, or that might even be the URL too. So I've got my device here. We're going to install a new app on it for this. We're just doing Rob's here, so we'll avoid Angular. We'll just stick with the regular demo app, and we'll get up at the app root. Got the home page, and so what the seed is going to do by default is it'll import the plugin. So this is how users of your plugin would use this. They'd import whatever APIs you expose, and it has this message API. And then this is actually going to hit, for now, this common, where this message is set up and set to some default message. And after everything builds, we can sort of see how this works and try it out. Any other plugin questions? We got a minute or two while we watch NativeScript. Your cat has been very quiet, Rob.
sleeping right now. I don't want to disturb him.
Dog has been quiet as well. She had, I don't know if you can see on camera, but she had a small surgery, nothing major or anything. She just had to have this little like cyst removed, but it's just made her tired, so she just finds a spot and just lays there for hours at a time. All right, the project is successfully built. Installing, so we should be able to try this out soon. Actually, I can start to, while this is happening, because we're gonna want to gut this as well, because this is really only exists just so you can see what this looks like by default. So this is the demo app. Your plugin is working on iOS. It's really working. And that's just because it's hitting this here. But if I, actually before I kill this, so because of this workflow now, if, like for example, I make a change here and change the message up, the plugin sort of workflow that NPM process is set up to watch the change that I make in here. So I'm in the source folder. I made this change to this file. The CLI detected that change. It did the TypeScript compilation. It then updated the file in my demo app, which was being watched from the CLI and showed that change live. So it's really kind of cool. A lot of this used to be pretty manual when developing plugins, but now this workflow is kind of nice and you can get up and running pretty quickly.
Yeah, this looks like a really nice way to get a new plugin kind of scaffolded up pretty quickly.
All right, so we have a math API. So now that we have this, let's just gut this. And like we don't need anything here. So we might break this temporarily. So we'll have common, and then so the plugin seed is set up to have Android and iOS implementations sort of set up for you. So it's extending from a common base because you might have some code that oftentimes you do have code you want to share that's totally cross-platform, that there's nothing sort of platform specific about it, but then it has logical places for you to put your iOS and your Android code. And apparently ALCS Game 4 was just postponed for any baseball fans out there. So let's see, let's make it an add method. So we'll say add, and the other thing you do have to do is this index TS file is basically, I think it's sort of best described as like the API that your plugin exposes. And this is a file, so if you, the documentation will have this. If you look to this building plugins, it's going to break this down into steps. So like set up a development workflow, write your plugin, and somewhere in here it'll mention the index file. Yeah, so you basically, this is what you're going to expose. So we're saying we have a single add method and we're exposing it. And then here's our iOS implementation, which there's nothing platform specific here. And then if I go up to my demo app and say, let's see, so currently we're just saying new math.message. Instead, we could say alert new math dot. And sometimes I found, maybe some of the plugin people that are on the call here, that sometimes I actually need to reload the window for VS Code to pick up on some of these APIs. Did it still not get it? New math dot. Oh, there we go. So new math.adds. It's just weird, but sometimes it might be because this plugin C does have all the TypeScript stuff set up. So if I got to kill some of this stuff.
Well, the iOS and Android declarations, yeah.
So it does have, all of this is pre-configured into this environment. So I don't know if like making one small change in here just takes it a while to propagate, but so in VS Code at least, I don't really know for other workflows, but there's this way you can reload the window. And I find that sometimes, so the comments said, sometimes it takes VS Code a while to catch up. And I that reload window sometimes is just like a hack to sort of force it to figure things out. And let's just alert this to make sure. Hopefully our watcher was able to keep track of all those changes and actually push this out. So we're at 5. So we have our pass-through now. So Rob, what iOS-y things can we do with math? Because we should find something we can do that's going to be different on iOS or Android. Doesn't have to be practical, but
I mean, you could multiply on one and add on the other.
But like, there's got to be like Objective-C.
You want something like
like an actual
unique to the platforms? Ooh, boy.
Like an actual, like, how do you? What's a math thing? Sine of how does? I think trigonometry might be a little bit too much. I don't really know what I'm doing there. Max of, there you go. How do I get the max of 3 numbers?
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Just plain C array. Objective-C's built-in max and min only works with 2 values. So wait a second. Is there just something called max? In all uppercases? Hold on. Doesn't look like it. I don't know. We got to do something that's a little bit different. Does anybody in the chat have any ideas? Objective-C math APIs. Quadrature? What's the equivalent of math that absolute? Abs, labs, fabs.
I'm kind of striking out myself here, looking up.
Oh yeah, I think that's a thing. So if we change this to be absolute value of a number, all right, so we'll change up so instead of adding numbers, let's see if this works. So if we said instead, let's get the absolute value of a number. And then we'll again reload this to see if we can get Visual Studio Code to catch up. And unlock my device. And let's see, we need new math dot absolute value. And so like that should be 1, right? How does math work? To see if I've caught up or I'm a little bit behind. I think it's still refreshing it. Yeah, there we go.
There we go. Yay.
We just nailed it. So if you want like the world's worst way to get the absolute value of a number in NativeScript, you build up a plugin, you expose an API. So here's what you're exposing, right? We're calling this plugins. We're creating this math class. We could create this as like static, so you don't need to instantiate, but whatever. And then we're getting the absolute value of a number. All right, so that works. So we totally have to make this work on Android to wrap things up. Is this making sense, Rob? Because I'm going to need a second here because this is going to take a minute to fire up for Android.
Yeah, I mean, it's I know more than I did an hour ago, and I think this pretty much validates what I was thinking coming into this, that it's cool that this is all possible to do, and I think from the average developer's perspective, you're probably going to want to look for existing plugins before you start diving into this, but this is awesome to have in case you need it.
Eddie's worried about us encroaching on his territory and claiming NativeScript math. I see in Java apparently there's java.lang.math. So this should be easy. We could spend another like half hour and have like a fully fledged plugin. Because you could then go, and there's also like publishing stuff built in here. So if you wanted to know, and actually, because Android's going to take a minute to build, like somewhere in here, it might be on the documentation. Sorry if I'm moving around too fast. I'm just trying to find, publisher plugin. So there's commands built in here. If you're new to NPM or you haven't tried working with that before, there's steps to help publish up just the appropriate files. So it'll do things like exclude the demos, only publish the source, make sure your TypeScript configuration is okay. You can also go through and like add unit tests, set up like automated testing of your plugin as well. So there's things more thorough. If you want to make NativeScript math, I won't be publishing this, so you could totally stake your claim on that.
Since JavaScript doesn't really do math, so
exactly, this is totally the best way of handling this. So I'll bring over the app thing later. The Android app is still building, so we've got a minute here in case there's any other. If you have really any questions in general at this point about just native APIs, about plugin development, any of those sorts of things, absolute value is not a function, and I think the reason for that is we haven't yet defined it. So in here, right, so there's no absolute value, so we have to make it absolute value of a number. Oops, I thought I had it copied from. Okay, I've got it open. So Java dot. It is still trippy, no matter how many times I do this, to be in essentially JavaScript, TypeScript, and type like java.lang.math. It's just profoundly a little bit weird. So java.lang.math.abs. And so that API should now exist, which means this should now work. And did it just like not work? So that's a bit. Does it change it like in line? Do we just find like a bug in the Java SDK?
Yeah, probably. It's far more likely than
I typoed something.
Yeah.
This is really kind of strange. Math.abs. Huh. I am here, right? Num var save. This is I should run a seminar on my debugging workflow here. This is real professional stuff. You can fire up like the debugger and work in this sort of thing as well. Oh, is there like another parameter for like how many values to go to?
Oh, how many decimal points?
That is a bizarre.
Interesting API difference between iOS and Android, though.
I feel like this is where I just was. Oh my god. This is going to bring back absolute nightmares for me. It's equal to the most negative Jesus. All right, I don't think I necessarily need to track this down, but it's something in me wants to know because it doesn't show any other.
You know what? The absolute value is just the positive representation of a number.
Are we totally? But wait, why did that happen on iOS then?
I don't know. It's kind of embarrassing. I might have to delete this whole video.
I'm gonna have to bring in my third graders to. Come on.
So
Google.
Android's working.
Then what the hell is iOS doing? All right. Yeah, I think Alex is trying to help in here. So, all right. So if I do this, right, it should. Okay, so that is actually expected. Then what the hell is iOS doing?
I'll put a negative number in
for iOS.
Yeah.
All right, so I got to switch to running this in iOS. This is hilarious. Objective C ABS API. Unless it takes like a. Depends on the type of the variable. Oh, because it's an integer.
Oh, it's an int.
So I need to. It's a floating point. So I need to fabs f or fabs. All right, we'll get this. I wouldn't want to leave this stream having a poorly implemented math plugin. I did today learn at least what absolute values of numbers are, so that's a positive. So we'll get this out of here. All right. So let's currently, it did make that number positive, but it treated it as an integer, which is why it became 1. So if I change this to fabs, I might need one of these. Okay. Right? That's what it was supposed to do. Yes.
I think so, yeah.
So there you go.
Hey.
There we go. Clean this up. So there's the world's like worst NativeScript plugin, but that actually does function. We can clean this up too. We just need to return that. And then if we did want to share some code, we put it in common, and that's basically the general workflow. And then we publish it when we're done. Fabs, who would have thought?
And to make this as embarrassing as possible, I think we maxed out on our viewers during the absolute worst part of the stream. So
it's the best part of the stream. finally, somebody. The thing is too, like I think both Eddie and Alex were trying to like nicely tell us that we just didn't know how absolute numbers work. And we were just ignoring that altogether. But we got it. We wrote the NativeScript math plugin.
Yep.
All right. Any other questions, Rob? Do you have anything else you think we should bring up? If chat has anything, now's the time, because I think we're going to have to wrap things up.
No, I think this is good. I mean, anybody who joined late, we'll have all these streams are going up on the NativeScript YouTube channel as well. So if you want to see what we did in the beginning, which was just kind of show ad hoc usage of native APIs in an app without this. without getting into the plugin architecture and stuff, but it's worthwhile watching that part, I assure you. But
this part was worthwhile too.
It was worthwhile in its own way, yeah.
See, I've got to start bringing up the random NativeScript swag I've accumulated over the years too. I've got my NativeScript fidget spinner here. You can all be jealous.
Oh yeah,
of.
Those are going to be hot again.
Yeah, I've got the cubes. I've got a NativeScript hat somewhere too, so I've got some collector's items. But all right. Well, thanks everybody for coming out. Thanks, Rob, for joining me. This was
pleasure.
Fun. We'll have to do it again. If you enjoyed this, let us know on Twitter. Twitch is still very much an experiment. So, feedback is welcome. Comments of Twitch, Twitter, wherever. But all right, wrap things up. So thanks again, everybody.
Cool. Bye.